Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thanks so much for coming, and either in person on this Zoom or later on to the YouTube to check out another fantastic Dana Vasali lecture, talking about all the important themes and things to think about as we walk through this beautiful and as we were talking about, somewhat dangerous life here on planet Earth. This is a Met How at Home program because we are always interested in learning more about the home that we live in. So I'll turn it over to you, Dana. Thanks so much for another well-researched program.
Thanks, Tracy. Hopefully well researched. I finished revising this last night and then spent the last hour frantically trying to. I thought you have to put that in there, and then I have to renumber the slides so I can keep track of where I am. So it's nice to have Google for research. So thanks to everybody who's here for coming along. This particular slide, and at least half of these I did show previously. I think it was 2020. But when I look at these slides, I can't remember why I have to look at the notes and re-educate myself, relearn information about any of these things. So it doesn't hurt to see things a second time. And I put in new slides, and I thought maybe I should. What's that warning that we say? Viewer discretion advised. Viewer discretion advised. I put in some slides that weren't in the previous show on how our species, Homo sapiens, is interacting with ecological reality. And, as everybody knows, we're not doing, a stellar job of it. But I thought it was worth mentioning, and I won't dwell on it, and I'll try not to depress you. I end on an up note. So, and actually, so this is a mountain lady slipper, as it says. And I'm remembering, one of the last things I did is put in these two advertisements. So I'm going to hit that button and pull up a little picture of the Meadow Naturalist in case you don't know about it, which is unlikely. I put this out. It's a quarterly. We're at the end of 28 years, to my shock, of the Meadow Naturalist. And this one deals with the evolution of flowers and how they evolve. So the naturalist really likes the evolutionary story and tends to dwell on that, and also has simpler things. Most people tell me their favorite page is the wildlife sightings. It's much easier to read. Anyhow, if you don't subscribe, you might be interested in knowing about it. And then also, I'm giving a talk on, I actually forget, February 7th or February 9th. I think it's the 9th at the Winthrop Library on alpine wildflowers of the world. Now that is a good subject because they're all so beautiful and so strange and so interesting. And this is probably the strangest and most interesting. This is among other names. This is called Darwin slipper. This is in Tierra del Fuego, calceolera. It's called calceolera. It has other common names, but it's such a the happy alien. That's the other name, the happy alien. So it's that program is easier to listen to than one on ecology, I think. So I'm just letting you know that's happening. So I'm going to get those out of there for the moment. So this is a lady slipper. It's an orchid. The orchid family is the second largest family of flowers on the planet. There are 28,000 species of orchids known, and some more still to be found. So the largest family is the aster family. That's sunflowers, all the composites, with 30,000 species. So an interesting point there is that the two families have, I would say, complete opposite strategies for survival. And that's the way things go on the planet. Many things work, many things don't work. Everything's competing for resources. And orchids are extremely successful. Well, part of their strategy, the aster family is like a helicopter landing pad. Any insect can land on a aster flower, And any insect, even with very short tongue, like a fly, can reach the nectar in the multiple florets in an aster flower. Orchids are the opposite. You have to find your way into an orchid. The resources are hidden away. They're hard to get at. Some of the orchids are deception pollinators. They act like they're going to offer a reward, but they don't. And that's the case with mountain lady slipper. It doesn't offer nectar. It doesn't offer pollen as food. It just smells good. So that works. Deception works. You wonder why humanity has problems telling lies. Well, it's an evolved behavior on the planet that leads to survivability for some species. So this particular species, well, several elements about any plant, any living organism. There are many avenues of learning about any organism. For instance, mountain lady slipper is a fun name because it suggests that the elves wore this as a flower, as a slipper, because it has that big bulb in the front petal. Cypripedium means so pet. It has the word pet in there, like petal, like foot. Podiatrist. Cypri is from Venus, the goddess of Venus. So this is Venus's slipper. So that scientific name, you can translate it and get some mileage out of it, and also helps you remember the name. It's Venus's slipper, and it grows in the mountains, Montana. So what's it up to? Well, it has it emits a fragrance. It has that bulb that invites an insect in once, but it's overhung and it's slippery on the inside. So when the insect goes in, it can't get out. It can't get back out that bulb. There's no way for the insect to get back out. The only way out is through a trap door in the back. And to open that trap door, it has to press. I mean, this is a flower we're talking about. It has a trap door. It has an exit at the rear of the flower. It has to press on a petal. Here's a diagram of this action. The bee goes in. Small bees go in. They get trapped. You can see how overhung that bulb is. There's a trap door at the back. As the bee goes out the back, it gets a glob of pollen, not one pollen grain, but 1,000 pollen grains glued to its head. I put a little yellow spot on that bee on the right to show that's what happens. It gets pollen. And then, because they don't have very big brains, they do it again. They go to another flower and they deliver that pollen. Pollinia, because there are numerous pollen grains. I think some orchids produce as many as 1 million seeds in one capsule. It's phenomenal reproductive rate. So that flower evolved in a relationship with some other elements of its environment, and that is a rough definition of ecology. Ecology is the relationship of organisms to their environment and to one another. The word was coined in about 1888. I forget exactly, but it's about 100 years old. But that's a bit of a window into us waking up to the fact that everything is in relationship. I have this great quote by, some of you will remember, Einstein. A human being experiences himself as something separate from the rest. Our job is to free ourselves from this prison. Everything is in relationship to everything else. And that's ecological reality. And that's what we're going to talk about. So it looks like, if you look at the natural world, it looks, at first glance, it looks like it's all about eat, survive, reproduce. So that's a fish evolving into a reptile, into an amphibian, reptile, primate, humans. What's it all about? It is interesting that we have that curiosity of mind, big brain, to wonder about the world. We haven't figured too much out. We figured a few things out. So what's it all about? Well, one thing it is about is competition. Everything does eat everything else. There's a short essay that's been posted at the Mental-Natsurist webpage for many years called How to Help the World by Joseph Campbell. It's a Hindu myth, and it's about a lesser god that was created whose very name is hunger. And the greater god, Vishnu, was so impressed with this lesser god whose very name was hunger that he hung it up over The entrance to is the temple of life, and no living being can enter the temple of life without doing homage to the God whose very nature is hunger. Everything eats everything else. It's a kind of discomforting aspect of life, but everything cooperates in ways we can't even imagine. I mean, we can imagine human cooperation, um, species cooperation, interspecies cooperation, and what's it all about? Competition cooperation. For some reason, it all turns out to be so beautiful. How is that possible? It's a mysterious universe and a mysterious planet. So one way that life has cooperated over time is this phenomenon I think I mentioned last week, endosymbiosis, which means life inside of another living organism. And it appears, it's now certainly for sure, that complex life has evolved over time by incorporating other life into its cellular structure. And probably it was an effort to consume the lesser sized organism, and instead somehow they began to cooperate. I don't think we know how that happened. This is a eukaryotic cell. We talked briefly about the fact that there are these two basic kinds of cells: simpler cells, prokaryotic, that's bacteria and archaea. All the other organisms, from plants to fungi to humans, have eukaryotic cells, which are, it is said, a single cell can be as complex as a 727 airplane, even if it's a single-celled organism, which brings up the question, how could that ever have evolved, which comes up, or sprung to life, comes up a little later in this program. So this is a eukaryotic cell. Well, it's a cooperative venture. Every cell in our body is a cooperative venture from this process of endosymbiosis, with organelles inside cooperating with the whole cell. And then you get to the biggest organism that's ever lived on the planet, a blue whale, that has, I think it has 100 quadrillion cells. We have 50 trillion. I mean, not an exact number, but approximately. Humans have approximately 50 trillion cells. A blue whale has 100 quadrillion, which is 1,000 trillion, and they all work together. So if you're looking for cooperation, it's around. All the cells work together to make our lives possible, to make blue whales and single-celled organisms. So we need to create the universe. There was no universe. That's the word from the scientific community. It sprang into being in an instant, the Big Bang. I don't know if it made any noise. That was astronomer Fred Hoyle coined that term, and he was actually joking when he said that. But I have this quote by a biologist, Terence McKenna. So everything sprang into existence in a single instant. Now, everything has complexified since then. In the beginning, there were no stars, there were no planets, there was no life, but there were elements. And those elements have complexified over time. That is a fact. The universe has complexified over time. So everything sprang into existence in a single moment. This biologist, Terence McKenna, says it's the limit case for unlikelihood that the universe would spring from nothing in a single instant for no reason. It's inexplicable. There are elements of the planet and the universe that science has been utterly unable to explain. Another one is the appearance of life. This is a cartoon where the scientist has all these beakers and test tubes and complexifications and tries to create life, and this life appears out of a beaker. The joke, are you my mommy? Did you create me? So scientists have tried to create life. The Miller-Urey experiment in the 50s, Miller-Urey, they took the elements they felt would be available in the early Earth, and they cooked them up and applied bolts of electricity like lightning, and they got complexification of simple elements into more complex molecules, but no life crawled out of that beaker. Humans really have no idea how life appeared. So the point in a way is we're immersed in mystery. We know a lot, and there's a lot we don't know. And I think it's good to realize that we live immersed in the mystery. I showed these previously. We're not going to dwell on it, but the point is the inherent orderliness of the universe. It's the order of the universe is built into the structure of atoms. So we talked about the fact hydrogen has one proton and one electron has one electron in its outer shell, its only shell. It has an electron shell, an orbital. It has one electron. That shell holds two electrons. Where did that rule come from? I have no idea. I've tried to look that up. Why, if it has one proton, will it hold two electrons? They have the exact same charge. But this is the orderliness of the universe. Oxygen has 8 electrons and 8 protons. So it starts to fill the second shell. 6 go into the second shell. Second shell holds 8. Oxygen has a certain electronic attraction, electronic proclivity to fill that shell. Same with hydrogen. So you could say, just hypothetically, you could take 2 hydrogens and join them with oxygen. You would have H2O and you would have water. It's just a naturally evolving. There was no water in the early universe. In fact, there was no oxygen, but oxygen was created by stellar fusion, and all the elements past hydrogen and helium were created in the center of stars. It's a journey. The universe is on a journey, and we are part of that journey. And that is the evolutionary story. That's the big history story. It's a good story. It's just not completely safe. So, ecology, interaction of organisms with one another, with matter and energy. So here's some characteristics. We're just trying to narrow it down so we can think about how does ecology work? How does life work on the planet? Energy flows through daily. Sun came up. I couldn't see it because it's so foggy. Sun came up about an hour ago. It's going to go across the sky and go back down. You know, as I've mentioned previously, it looks like the sun is going around the earth. And when it was first suggested by Giordano Bruno and Copernicus and Galileo that the earth went around the sun, they were all either killed or arrested and tortured. There's this tendency to be self-centered. So energy flows daily. Water flows through annually. Water has to appear out of the sky, flow through the system, down the river, and back to the ocean, or it cycles. Resources cycle perpetually. You have to have those basic elements. You have to have nitrogen, you have to have phosphorus, you have to have carbon, you have to have potassium. There are no more resources being delivered from space. The planet has existed for 4.5 billion years. Life has existed for almost 4 billion years. That means the resources have to constantly cycle. That is the heart of ecology, that everything cycles. Photosynthesis is the foundation of the biosphere, and everything eats everything else. There's a balance of predator, preys, and decomposers. So we're going to talk about those briefly. Energy flows in from outside the ecosystem. We know that, but it's not uninteresting that that's the basis of life on the planet. It flows in from the star that I think improbably is 93 million miles away. It's burning 600 million tons of hydrogen a second. Now, how improbable is that? I mean, the scientific information about the universe is incomprehensible. How can you burn 600 million tons a second and persist for 4.5 billion years and go on into the future for possibly that long into the future? And the temperature, I lost track of it, but it's hot, baby. So the Earth intercepts 1/billionth of that energy coming from the sun. So an interesting question is, what would happen if the Earth intercepted 2/billionths of the energy coming from the sun? Of course, the answer is we'd roast. And that brings up this phenomenon of Goldilocks, the Goldilocks effects. Science uses that term to think about the reality of the universe and life on the planet. Everything is just right in a very mysterious way, I've got a list going in my big history file on Goldilocks effects. I don't think you would ever come to an end of the elements, the aspects of the universe that are just right for life. So this picture of Roger Lake, it's actually a bit aged because Roger Lake burned some years ago. It's coming back green. It doesn't look quite like this, but in any case, the point here is look at all that biomass around that lake. All those subalpine fir, and whatever else those trees are, Sitka or Engelmann spruce, and lodgepole in the front. Where did it come from? Where did it come from? There was a glacier there 10,000 years ago. There was no life there. Where did all that come from? And the answer is, as we've talked about, it came from the atmosphere. It's all of that biomass, and I think I have the graphic here of life on Earth. 90% of it came from the atmosphere. It's 90% carbon dioxide. I find that as shocking as any other fact about reality. I can never quite get used to it, but biomass on the planet is 90% carbon dioxide. So that most of the weight biomass, most of the weight of the plant on the of life on the planet are plants, as shown in that graphic. 450 gigatons. That's 450 billion tons. I don't know who weighed it. It'd be a tough assignment. I wouldn't want that contract, but that's the estimated weight of life on the of plant life on the planet. Look at everything else. Everything else is a hangnail on the plants. Why? Because plants are the photosynthesizers. Plants are the ones that capture the energy of the sun and make that energy available to other life forms. Now that is ecology. So there's kind of a graphic of that phenomenon that shows a water wheel or an energy wheel, just an imaginary depiction showing the sun powering life. How does it do it? It takes carbon dioxide and water. You know this. It splits the water apart and attaches that hydrogen to the carbon dioxide and creates sugar. In a way, it's a magic trick. So sugar has energy in the hydrocarbon bonds. Energy is what's necessary for life. It's stored energy. The sunlight is nice. Sunlight feels good, but you can't power organic bodies like our own with sunlight. You need an energy source that can be used chemically, and that is what's created by photosynthesis. So this is energy being passed through an ecosystem, through different levels of the ecosystem. The J is for joules. A joule is a measure of energy. It's a very small measure of energy. Looking it up online, it was described as lifting a pen from like 3 feet. Lifting a pen 3 feet would be the expenditure of approximately 1 joule of energy. So a joule is just small. It's small, but they use big numbers. So for every million joules of sunlight that reaches the Earth, 1% is captured by photosynthesis. The rest is either reflected or transformed into heat. So that 1% is captured by photosynthetic organisms, plants, and algae. And then that energy is passed through the biosphere, through living organisms. So when a herbivore eats a plant, it only is able to incorporate 10% of the energy captured in those hydrocarbon bonds into its own body. The rest is released as heat. A secondary consumer that is eating a carnivore eating an herbivore, and then you get a top level carnivore. I always remember the book, Why Large Animals Are Rare. And the reason is there's very little energy left at the top of the energy chain because it's dissipated as heat. It's arguably an inefficient process. Most of the energy is lost as heat. This is energy use by human beings, and this is a kind of thing that I added to this slideshow that wasn't in it previously. Energy used by humans over time. Well, down at the bottom it says primitive, 2,000 kilocalories a day, because that's the food we eat. That's approximately how much energy is needed to maintain the human body on a daily basis. So then it goes up from there. The energy use of humanity has increased dramatically over time. Hunter-gatherers. That is, I would say, the use of fire. So you're using the energy in wood to both heat your own body and to cook the food and make more nutrients available from the cooked food. Early agriculture, you've harnessed a couple of oxen to a plow. So you're utilizing the energy in them, and your total energy necessary for your life is going up. It increases. Early industrial will be the beginning use of fossil fuels. And then you see at the top, modern industrial humans use 100 times, 100 times more energy than the basic need of energy for the human body. Where does that come from? Well, of course, it comes from fossil fuels. So we've augmented the energy necessary for life by being able to tap into stored hydrocarbons, stored sunlight. There's a book called Last Days of Ancient Sunlight about fossil fuels. So it's as if we have slaves that work for us. I do occasionally think if I had to push my car from here to Twist, it wouldn't work. I wouldn't be able to do it. But there's energy to get to Hank's Market and put gas in the tank, which has this huge amount of energy, which we don't think very much about, incorporated in the gasoline. But we constantly, then I go to Hank's, and all of that food was created with the use of fossil fuels. Those are our energy slaves. So this is a graph of energy use over time. It starts on the lower left at the year 1800. This is for all of humanity. I suppose that's terawatt hours, TWH, terawatt hours. I forget. Terawatts is a large measure of energy, the opposite of joules. But this is how our energy use has increased over time from 1800 to 2019. The bottom line is biomass, using traditional biomass. So that would be eating, that's biomass, and fire, using fire to heat ourselves. The addition of coal, I think I circled these little reds. The addition of coal, the addition of oil, natural gas, and I circled. So I think it's a little surprising the quantity of energy over the base need of the human body. It's a bit shocking and the rate of increase from 1900 to the present. It's increased by an enormous amount. I think I see what I put here. Yeah. So not to get too controversial, and you may or may not agree with this, but I think almost any ecologist would agree that fossil fuels are a finite resource. So we don't know when they will reach the halfway point, which is probably more important than the end point, because then they're going to diminish. But there will someday be a halfway point, and some observers of ecology and human society think we're fairly close to the halfway point. In any case, we use an awful lot of fossil fuels to fuel our society. Back to ecology. So energy flows. Energy flows on a daily basis unless you're using fossil fuels, in which case you can keep it flowing at night too. Water cycles pretty much on an annual basis. It evaporates from the oceans and the lakes, but surprisingly, and I think I circled here, it evaporates from vegetation. It is said that half of the rain that falls, at least in a rainforest, comes from the rainforest itself. So the rainforest is creating its own rain. It's just a kind of a surprising fact, but one of the reasons it's so wet in a rainforest is that they transpire and evaporate so much water into the atmosphere that it just rains again. And so it's a cycle that nurtures the vast biodiversity of the rainforest. This is actually a picture I took of Afghanistan when I was flying in sometime a decade ago. Now, it is said that Afghanistan used to be 50% forested, and all the trees have been cut down. It's hard to find a tree in Afghanistan. The easiest place to find wood is in the firewood piles in Kabul, where the peasants have gone into the remaining forest and cut them down for firewood. So the point here is that the ecological cycle is interrupted. There's no plant life. There's no trees left on much of the landscape of these it's not just Afghanistan. These are the long inhabited portions of the planet. This is where humanity first created cultures and complexity. So where does nature put its garbage? I like this picture for some reason. This is at Cutthroat Lake, up behind Cutthroat Lake, on the North Cross State Highway. And this is nature's garbage. Nature creates all these structures and then they fall over. And what happens to them? We know what happens to them. They decompose. There are the whole kingdom of life, the fungi and bacteria that are decomposers. These are puffballs and oyster mushrooms. That tree has since fallen over. It's here on my property. But why did it fall over? It fell over because these fungi have permeated the wood, which has hydrocarbons in it, has the energy of the sun incorporated into the wood and broken it apart and created their own lives out of the energy incorporated in that wood. And the tree fell over, and now it's moldering on the ground and continuing to decay, continuing to release energy to decomposers. That's where nature that's where nature puts its garbage back. Its cycles. Everything in nature cycles. This is obviously a tree that has almost completely decomposed, but that tree is nurturing the life of the soil. Why? Because a tree has the energy of the sun incorporated in its hydrocarbon bonds. Everything cycles. So these are necessary elements of life. No more being delivered. I think I wrote that in there. There's no more being delivered. They've been cycling for 4.5 billion years. If they didn't, life would have stopped long ago. It's just the inherent nature of ecological reality is that everything cycles. Where do humans put their garbage? You know the answer to that. They put it in the dump. Why? We're just not, it's not our fault. Forgive them, Father. You know, we're not born with an ecological handbook. We're not born with ecological insight. Arguably, we're definitely becoming more ecologically literate. We're beginning to understand that we're embedded on an ecological planet in an ecological system and that everything cycles. So there's a lot of concern, obviously, about the garbage we create. So this is another way in which we're not very ecological. Our lives are supported by formerly living organisms, biomass, mass of living biological organisms. We eat them. We extract the nutrients and the energy from the organisms we eat, and then we throw the manure away. We don't know what to do with it. We don't like it, so we just flush it down the toilet so we don't have to look at it. It's an aversion. It's an interesting phenomenon how averse we are to the reality of ecology. And so there's another option here, and that would be to compost it. And that's what nature does. All of the manure that comes out of all the living organisms on the planet goes back into the soil and decomposes, and the energy and the nutrients are reincorporated into the biosphere. Unlike us, but human, it's a way that we can learn and grow. That's ecological literacy. This are the list of the nutrients in humanure. Human poop. I underlined human nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Human manure is 5% to 7% nitrogen. That's higher than chicken manure. It's the highest thing on that list is human manure. But what do we do? We throw it away or we flush it into our water systems. It's just not ecological. We didn't know. We didn't know. We are learning. There's a lot of movement. There are good. Oh yeah, this is a cute visual. This is a human manure company, and you can't quite read it. You're fortunate, but I'm going to read it to you. His little byline there says, "Your shit is our bread and butter." Okay, well, that's a joke, but it is the basis of life. And that is out of this very good book called The Human Manure Handbook, which has been around for 30 years. And there are other books on the subject because we're waking up to ecological reality. And ecological reality is everything cycles. This book is available for free online, or you can buy it. I have several copies. For me, it's an extremely meaningful book because it's the best ecology book I've ever read. It's not just about human manure, it's about ecological reality. I highly recommend it. Now, so there's a book called Farmers of 40 Centuries. Yeah, came out 100 years ago, but it's kind of a famous seminal ecological book documenting the fact that in China, formerly, all human manure was recycled into the soil. There's a story, I don't know if it's from that book, it may well be. Farmers would put their outhouses out at the road. It'd be like me putting an outhouse out on the East County Road, hoping people would make a deposit, because there's nothing more valuable than resource-rich human manure, any kind of manure, and organic matter. So the key to healthy soil is getting the organic matter back into the soil. A little bit on soil, just a little bit of soil. There's not that, even rich soil doesn't have that much organic matter in it. We're only asking for 5%, but that 5% when it rains, that organic matter absorbs that moisture and holds it. I notice here with, we have glacial soils. There was a glacier here 10 or 12,000 years ago. And it's a fairly arid environment here in the Met Howe. In our native soil, there's very little organic matter. And the way, if you want to grow a garden, and what I've done here is I'm constantly incorporating organic matter into the soil. I got one of those 1,000-pound hay bales that had been abandoned. I got it for free, and I spent several days spreading it out over some land in October, because it'll start to decompose in the winter, and then I can turn it into the soil, get organic matter into the soil. Then organic matter has the energy of the sun incorporated in its hydrocarbon bonds. It has nitrogen, it has phosphorus, has life in it. So this is the life of the soil out of a good little handbook on soil. And I forget the actual measurement. I don't know if it's a square foot or a square meter, but this is the life of the soil. So how many in a square meter? How many snails? How many slugs? 100, 3,000 earthworms, springtails, 50,000, 100,000 mites, down to bacteria, 10, let's see, that's 10 million, billion, trillion, 10 trillion bacteria. What are they living on? They have to have something. They aren't eating sand. They aren't eating sand. They're utilizing the energy bound up in the organic matter. So nitrogen is one of the most important nutrients for life. Where does it come? So life has to figure out a way. The atmosphere is 78% nitrogen. It's inert. It's N2. It's two atoms of hydrogen locked together. I'm sure they filled their second shell orbital in the process, and they are inert. They won't react with anything. The only way but nitrogen is necessary for any living organism. To make it necessary for life, you either need to hit it with a lightning bolt, or life has to figure out how to split that molecule apart. Well, there are nitrogen-fixing bacteria that live in the soil and can split nitrogen apart. And so plants have created a symbiotic relationship with nitrogen-fixing bacteria, and the pea family, Fabaceae, they all are nitrogen fixing. They create little vesicles on their roots, and the nitrogen fixing bacteria, which I'm pretty sure are anaerobic, they cannot live in the presence of oxygen, which in a part means that they're anciently evolved. Before there was oxygen in the atmosphere. Now they have to hide from the atmosphere, which is full of oxygen. They live on the roots in the soil. They fix those. So this other one, I left the name out briefly, but it's alder. I thought it's always surprising to me that alder is a nitrogen fixer. But that is how nature recycles nitrogen from an inert molecule in the atmosphere. Humans do it with natural gas. This is the Haber-Bosch method of cracking the nitrogen in the atmosphere and turning into a molecule that is then available for life. And so on the left, I wrote in, if you add up those numbers, in nitrogen in the old days, there was 126 megatons available probably per year into for the biosphere, for the sphere of life. And we've doubled that. But how did we do it? We use natural gas. We use a fossil fuel to crack that nitrogen apart. So I put in this quote at the bottom from somebody at Princeton: modern agriculture is a means of turning oil into food. Well, that could be fine, except for various problems with fossil fuels. The primary, the great buzz right now is global warming, but there is also the fact that fossil fuels are definitely finite. They are a fossil. They are fossilized solar energy that has been captured over the last 500 million years. They will run out in the next century. So there's this balance. Oh, good. We're well along. Ecosystem balances predators, preys, and decomposers. Well, this is a famous graph from the annals of ecology on the cycles of snowshoe hare and lynx. You cannot have lynx without snowshoe hare. I would say locally, you can't have snowshoe hare without young lodgepole pine, because I remember studies done up on Boulder Creek in the 70s and 80s after the fire on Boulder Creek in about 1970, when all of the young, lodgepole pines replace themselves. Their cones, they're co-evolved with fire. Their cones open after they open in the heat of a fire, drop seeds on the ground. You get young you get young lodgepoles. Well, in the winter, they stick up out of the snow, and that's what snowshoe hare eat. So you can't have lynx without hare. You can't have hare without lodgepole pine. You can't have lodgepole pine without fire. They're all interconnected, and they cycle through time. Spotted frog, I took this picture at Aspen Lake. Aspen Lake. It was quite a scene. So this is a female spotted frog. She laid one of those egg masses. There's an egg mass in front of her. You can see a circle there. One spotted frog will lay 500 eggs, but they had joined together. They had all laid their eggs together. So there's probably at least 10,000 eggs in that mass of eggs. How many in her egg mass of 5,000 eggs? How many has to survive to replace the parents? 2. So life is based on dying. 400 on average, 498 of those 500 eggs have to not survive to reproduce, or the world would start to fill up with spotted frogs. But there's a lot of dying that goes on the planet. This is St. Matthews Island off the coast of Alaska, where reindeer were introduced in World War II to supply food to a radio station. 20 reindeer were introduced. There were no predators. So this is a system now where the predators have been removed, which of course is a common theme throughout the landscape these days. Well, with no predators, the reindeer reproduced wildly, and their numbers went up to 6,000. They ate all of the biomass on the planet. They ate all the lichen, probably all the plant life, and starved to death. And that's what happens when you try to short circuit natural cycles. It's a famous study that was done. Today, there's no reindeer on St. Matthews Island. So this is a human population. The blue line is the human population suddenly starting to shoot upwards in 1800 to 2000, and then the increase in the use of fossil fuels by the red line. The human population today is supported by fossil fuels. Modern agriculture is a means of turning energy into food. Now, interestingly enough, I noticed this stops at 7 billion up there in the upper left. There's now 8 billion on the planet. My files on ecology are getting a little dated, but they're good enough for who it's for. Good enough. So, characteristics of terrestrial ecosystems, ecology, energy flows through daily. Sun comes up, goes across the sky, goes back down, has to be stored for there to be an ecosystem. Water flows through annually. That water has to be stored. Life does it by putting organic matter into the soil and retaining that moisture. Resources cycle perpetually. There's no more being delivered since the inception of the planet 4.5 billion years ago. Photosynthesis, everything eats everything else. So a durable human culture, we would live on our energy income, maybe a little bit of supplementary energy income, a little bit, but not the way we're doing it right now. I mean, humans did live for most of the history of the species, which is 200,000 years. We lived on energy income. It can be done. Doesn't mean we have to be cavemen, but some sort of energy reduction would be necessary to live in ecological balance with our ecosystems. Frugal water use. Don't create waste. There are ways for even humanity to do that. Oops, sorry. I want to get to the end. Population has to be in balance. So I would say there's no way to support 8 billion people. That's the current population of the planet without fossil fuels. You could support a smaller population. So this is, I thought, on the more positive note, that life renews itself. This is Krakatoa. And at Krakatoa, I looked it up. I can't quite remember. It blew. It blows repeatedly. But I think it was 1883. Krakatoa really blew. It was Krakatoa. The whole island blew up, and then the island on the upper left reappeared. And at Krakatoa means child of Krakatoa, because magma continued to flow out, and the An Island reappeared. Well, that island then was recolonized by life. Science took a great interest in it and studied the recolonization. Some of the first organisms to land were spiders. Remember how spiders can balloon through the atmosphere? Some spiders can release those gossamer threads into the air, and they just blow on the wind and travel through the atmosphere. In any case, the island has been revegetated and repopulated by numerous organisms. Life regenerates itself. There's no doubt about it. So the damage done by humanity would heal, would definitely heal. This is a picture I took of the Met House 15,000 years ago. It was completely filled with ice. Unbelievable. Where were the forests? Where were the mammals? Where were the birds? There would have been few to none, few to none. But now look at the Met House. It's completely regenerated itself with the melting of the ice and with the help of the ice, because the ice released the nutrients in the rocks. They ground up the rocks and created all the elements necessary for life are then much more available. Like I've done soil tests on the gravelly soil we have on my soil here, and it's very high in phosphorus. Why? Because the glaciers ground up the rocks and made nutrients available to life. Good planets are hard to find. It's a very mysterious place. The universe is immeasurably large, and the only life known, only life ever found, any evidence of life is on Earth. Here's a picture of the Earth from the moon. That's from 200,000 miles away. Here's a picture of the Earth from 4 billion miles away. Picture of the Earth right there. So we're adrift in space with no help coming from the outside. So I like that line, it's some of that's rather sobering material, but there is that line from some observer of life. Don't worry, be happy. Sapere aude means think for yourself. So that's, a little window into the ecological reality of the planet, and we're finishing ahead of time. Yay. Stop share. Oh, good. I didn't drive everybody away.
We have lots of, we've got some comments in the chat here.
Let me look at chat and
let me just come through. Is the blue whale larger than the dinosaurs?
I think I'm remembering correctly that a blue whale is the largest organism that's ever lived on the planet. Google would know for sure, but I think that's my sense. I've looked it up, but there's so many facts I can never remember them. In any case, it's enormous. And what did I say? I think, again, I get this information obviously from Google. I don't know how accurate it is, but the number I gave was 100 trillion cells in a blue whale. We have, 100 quadrillion. We have 50 trillion. That's impressive enough. And the point is, all those cells have to work together to make life possible. They're all communicating with one another and interacting in a communal way to make life possible. So apparently cooperation is possible. Let me see here. Nutrient cycling septic systems many of you use. This is from Craig. So I don't know, that's a little complicated. It has a good link that'd be interesting to look at. But nutrient cycling septic systems actually, my offhand comment would be that nutrients in septic systems, they aren't typically cycled. Now, how often do you pump a septic tank? Every 10 or 20 years. And nowadays, they do spread that on some fields in the Met House. I know that they spray it like up Alder Creek. There's an experimental plot up an alfalfa field and a warning sign, even though I think it would probably be safe out of a septic system. But they spray that septic sludge, which is arguably humanure. It's not quite humanure. Humanure infers that it's been composted and decomposed. So there's no longer like poop. You cannot tell. It looks like compost you would buy at the feed store once it's decomposed. So, I could mention I have a composting toilet. I would put that in quotes. It's an inexpensive one made out of a septic tank. I put a divider down the middle of it. And it takes me at least 10 years to fill one side, which means it can then sit for 10 years before I shovel it out. And then I shovel it out and I'll put it on soil that's safe. Even though 10 years, all the microorganisms that could be dangerous have expired. Anyhow, I am making an effort. This stuff is, it's meaningful to me, and I'm making an attempt to recycle the nutrients that give me my life. And it's not a common way to look at things in our culture. I don't know why. Bravo, bravo. Thanks, finger iPad. Sally. So I can only see a couple here. I don't know if there's more. Anyhow, there's also a
Yeah,
moment if
Gary.
anybody wants to say anything.
Yeah, there were a couple of quotes from Gary Richardson earlier. One of my favorite reminders: we are bits of stellar matter that got cold by accident, bits of a star gone wrong. That's Sir Arthur Eddington. And Gary also shared variation on the theme: we are stardust, we are golden, we are million-year-old carbon, and we've got to get ourselves back to the garden. Yep, Joni's words
Who was that? Who
continue
sang that?
on. Joni Mitchell, Woodstock. We are starred. And Crosby, Stills and Nash also did a variation on that song.
It's a beautiful process. The whole phenomenon is magnificent. I think it's unnerving for us because we don't last forever and we don't like that. But I think we can make progress moving into ecological reality and find some not just solace but delight in being a part of ecological reality and this mystery of life in the universe. I think it's got real possibilities. So if anybody has any comment, you have to unmute
Especially if you don't embalm yourself. Okay.
Well, that's very relevant to the whole conversation. We embalm ourselves because we're totally adverse to the ecological cycles. We don't want to die. We don't want to decompose. I get it. But I think we can make progress into reality, and that is that we do die and we do decompose. But that's not the end of the story. We become, it is said that any human who has lived, that we would have a few atoms of that person from the old days. I mean, they pick out some of the best and the worst of that human being incorporated into our bodies because everything cycles. All the nutrients cycle throughout the planet. It's a beautiful phenomenon. It may make us uncomfortable, but it's not the worst thing. There are
Well,
worse.
probably a lot of us here have already made that leap of being okay with
Okay, yeah,
the
somewhat
cycle.
okay. Okay.
Yeah, anything else? Any other comments out there?
So I'll mention next week's the last in this series. It's on
Okay.
humanity.
Yeah.
I've addressed that. I've dealt with that before, and my favorite way of dealing with it really is the evolutionary story. I mean, we dealt with some of the issues of humanity tonight, and they'll probably come up again next week. But I've always found the evolutionary story interesting. The evolution from primates, the fossil evidence for the different Homo species, Homo habilis and Homo neanderthalensis, and what evidence exists. It's fascinating to ponder the fact that we have evolved over time and that humans are smart enough to have traced that story in the fossil record. So that's what I'll be talking about next week.
Next week. Yes, one more week.
Fantastic. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.